you very much, Jenny. Appreciate it. I get to hear it even more than once, which I love. So here's the first question. Will we ever see a unified Korea, and if so, who would be in charge?
This question does come up a lot, and I like to say, the challenge is first, how do we coexist? And once they figure that out, then they can figure out what the next step is. And I think that's one of the things that the Moon administration has really put forward, is that their policy is not a unification policy. It is a peace and co-prosperity policy. So once we can reconcile, once we can learn to live together, once we can start to work on economic cooperation and start to normalize relations, then figure out whether unification is really the right next step forward. So I can't answer that question, but I can say, yeah, it's still a long way off.
Okay. Other than high-profile summit and PR statements, is there real progress or work being done on the ground to improve U.S.-North Korea relations?
So there is a lot of meetings that are happening between the U.S. and North Korea on the diplomatic side. It's one of those things where North Korea is taking a lot of measures right now as sort of confidence-building measures. And they get criticized a lot for being, well, it's not actual steps towards denuclearization because it doesn't deal with their core capabilities. But again, it's the beginning of a process. There is no technical agreement in place. They're not obligated to do any of these things. They are offering things on the fringes of their program to say, here, we're willing to do this right now. Watch us do this. It's a confidence-building measure to help kind of fuel the negotiation process and to start to establish a relationship of trust. The problem has become, because it's such high-level diplomacy, is again, once those proposals, if there's disagreements and grievances among the proposals of what the U.S. sees the way forward versus what North Korea sees the way forward, there have been times where the U.S. has tried to set up a negotiation mechanism, has tried to contact the North Koreans, but the North Koreans have been frustrated and so won't answer the phone. And then you get the letters to Trump and you get the missives in the media. And so there are some structural problems with this type of diplomacy that are new to this diplomatic process that we need to learn to deal with.
Regarding North Korea's nuclear buildup, has China policy been to encourage it or discourage it? And could they, China, pressure Kim Jong-un to reduce their nuclear weapons?
So China does not want North Korea to have nuclear weapons. If China could stop them from doing it, China would have stopped them from doing it. However, it's not China's highest priority either. So, it's one thing where, China's highest priority is stability in the region in order for them to have their, economic prosperity and economic development. So anything that disrupts that stability is a threat to China. So over the past couple of years, especially last year, you did see China willing to take stronger actions against North Korea because it was becoming such a problem. All of their missile testing and their sort of unrelenting pace of missile testing. But what you also saw in that process was, a deterioration of China and North Korea relations to the lowest point it's been in modern history. China does, Xi Jinping does not like Kim Jong-un. But the first meeting between Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping was not because they really wanted to meet each other, but it was out of necessity to be part of the conversation as North Korea moves forward with these other tracks. So, China has more leverage when they are engaged and when they are especially engaged economically with North Korea, because it gives North Korea something to lose. The more you cut North Korea off, the less leverage you actually have over time, because they're already playing outside the system pretty easily. So taking away more of things they don't have yet does not build leverage over time. So China certainly does have some leverage, and especially economic leverage, but I think too many people overestimate what that economic leverage means in terms of political leverage.
So is the North Korean economy, political system likely to collapse?
No.
What does actually the president of, President Moon, what does he want from North Korea that he's going after it so vehemently?
So the North Korean economy is actually the best it's ever been in North Korean history. So, you know, it's lived through famine, it's muddled through, you know, broken command system. You have a thriving market, a burgeoning market economy. You have over 400 state-sanctioned markets that are operating. You have private businesses popping up and entrepreneurship popping up. You have people that are, you know, you have market competition. You have like 4 different taxi companies in Pyongyang to choose from. You have like 10 different brands of toothpaste to buy in the stores. You know, North Korea now has even gotten to the point where they're running advertisements on TV for different products and stuff. So, you know, North Korea's economy is stronger than it ever has been. It is still a poor country, but, you know, by relative standards, the people are in the best condition that they've known. In terms of what Moon Jae-in wants in that process, is that Moon Jae-in is also dealing with a domestic economic crisis. You know, South Korea is transitioning from a developmental economy into a more mature economy, and is dealing with the market, you know, the growth, stagnation of growth in the domestic economy. And so, you know, one of the things that the South Korean economists and politicians have always sort of looked at is like, in dealing with this, instead of doing, again, the hard work to make that transition and do the regulatory reforms and do the, you know, labor reforms and the kinds of things that would meet the new socioeconomic needs, they keep looking at like, well, if we could just get North Korea on board and build economic cooperation with North Korea. And if you look at South Korea's economic plans right now, a lot of it is contingent on these 3 economic zones, all of which go through North Korea. So building infrastructure through North Korea to Eurasia, you know, building economic zones with North Korea to capitalize on North Korea's cheap labor, building, you know, allowing small businesses in South Korea to build in, you know, in North Korea and capitalize in North Korea rather than dealing with these domestic structural issues. And so there's a lot now that he's betting on North Korea. North Korea has become kind of the promised land. And the difference between the Park Geun-hye administration, the previous administration, and this one is that, you know, when Park Geun-hye talked about if we could just unify with North Korea, it would be, you know, an economic bonanza. Well, what Moon Jae-in has done now is sort of remove that prerequisite of unification to say if we can just learn to coexist and start this economic cooperation, it can be a bonanza. And so we really do have kind of another bonanza policy with a little different formulation.
And what is the state of human rights in North Korea? Is it getting worse, or is it getting better, or is it staying the same?
I mean, it's still bad, but it is getting better. But it's all relative. So, you know, the thing is, like, in North Korea, I think, you know, because of media portrayals, because people don't know a lot about North Korea, because it's hard to get information about North Korea, credible information about North Korea, a lot of the information that people get, the picture that people get is really shaped by defector testimony. And it becomes too easy to think about North Korea as this sort of monolithic society and have monolithic experiences, life experiences. But in fact, there's a multiplicity of life experiences. And the difference is, too, is that, you know, the ones who are doing well don't defect. So, you know, you do have, you know, a lack of civil liberties. You do have, you know, there's no freedom of assembly, there's no freedom of movement. You do need permission from the government to leave the country. Sometimes you need permission from the government even to leave your city. You know, there's no freedom of press. There's no kind of those social freedoms. However, because it is more and more growing market economy, money is becoming more important and is sort of loosening that social control. And so you do have kind of a widening socioeconomic space. You have also seen improvements in the human rights situation. So for instance, about half of the prison camps have closed down. You have concerted efforts from the North Korean government to deal with such issues as disability rights, children's rights, improving access and improving the situation for these vulnerable populations. It's a slow process, but the fact that they are acknowledging and have sort of they've had ongoing human rights dialogues with European officials for several years. I was telling Lynn earlier, I have a friend in Beijing who, the last time I saw him, he was telling me that he was on his way to Pyongyang because Pyongyang had invited him to speak at an international human rights conference in Pyongyang. And I was like, okay, so they're willing to talk about human rights. I don't know what they discussed at the conference, but the fact that they invited the Chinese to participate, I think it shows it's all relative. But certainly, they're willing to talk about it if it's addressed in sort of a respectful way. If you go in and kind of accuse them, and it's sort of like in the nuclear process. It's unrealistic to think that you're going to start with the hardest parts first. So, North Korea is not just going to come to the table, put its weapons down, and say, what can I get for this? The same way on the human rights front, they're not just going to, deal with the prison camps first. They're going to deal with sort of the periphery and build up some kind of trust and figure out kind of where they fit into that situation. So, the goal is to create the forums to have those discussions. In order to, and that will be required if we do move down the road of normalizing relations. North Korea will have to learn how to be a more normal state.
Okay, and just quickly, why did you choose to concentrate on studying North Korea?
So I'll tell you, back in '95, I was in Korea in college. I'm old. And so in '95, I remember being a college student. I was a sophomore studying at Ewha Women's University. And this was at a time when there were reports coming out of North Korea that there was famine in North Korea. And I remember talking about this with my friends and colleagues, and nobody believed the news that there was famine in North Korea. And it really struck me as odd of like, why wouldn't, and I didn't know anything about Korean history and about North Korea specifically before then. But that really sparked my interest as to why wouldn't the South Koreans believe the North Koreans when they say there's famine in North Korea? And that's really how I started studying North Korea.
Thank you. Jenny, thank you so much for your talk today. I just have a couple very brief announcements to make about upcoming events. Tomorrow morning, we'll be at all